Welcome inside the Mandalay Bay Convention Center, where Ohio State participated in the first day of Big Ten Media Days on Tuesday, alongside five other schools from the Big Ten on the first of 3 days here in the first ever Las Vegas Big Ten Media Days. We got to hear from Ryan Day today. We got to hear from Jeremiah Smith, from Caleb Downs, from Sonny Styles, along with representatives from five other schools and Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti. Andy, as we wrap up the day here, what is your biggest takeaway from the day?
Yeah, I think for me it was just the conference unity, as strange as it might sound, on the topic of kind of the future of the college football playoff structure and in terms of scheduling. I think both Ryan Day and Curt Cignetti today were saying just how different it is playing 9 conference games in the Big Ten versus 8 conference games in the SEC, and that call for 4 automatic qualifiers in the Big Ten, I think, was pretty consistent across, the conference. But Tony Petitti certainly was advocating for that in his press conference. But then Curt Cignetti calling for it, saying why shouldn't the Big Ten have 4 automatic qualifiers? Saying that he wants a standardized schedule and he'd be in favor of the Big Ten and an SEC even having regular, like them playing a non-conference game against each other every year. But Ryan Day getting on that as well, saying again it's different when you're playing 9 conference games versus 8 conference games, and that call for 4 automatic qualifiers from the Big Ten, I think from a 1,000-foot view, is what stood out most about the entire day and just like the future of college football and as we are moving forward in this new era. And not just, obviously, playoff structures, too, but a lot of discussions about the College Sports Commission and the Clearinghouse and NIL and what the future of that looks like with revenue sharing, the clarity that Ryan Day wants there. As it pertains to Ohio State, I think just continued conversation. We talk about it all the time, just how special Jeremiah Smith is. But to hear time and again more praise about him, and Ryan Day saying he's bigger, faster, stronger right now than he was last season, which you expect some physical development, but we saw Jeremiah Smith be named an Iron Buckeye this spring. And hearing Jeremiah, too, dive into how competitive he's been since he was a little kid. I mean, Ryan Day said it, that every single drill he goes out there, he wants to be first, he wants to win. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be sprints, it could be just your routine position, individual work. Jeremiah Smith is always competing, always wanting to be the best on the field, and it shows in his play. And so from an Ohio State sense, I think just that feeling of what Jeremiah Smith could be in for this year, and as crazy as it sounds, could be taking a big jump even from what he did in his superstar breakout freshman year.
I'd like to see the Big Ten and SEC play each other every year, too. That sounds like fun to me. I know that the idea's been floated, and it kind of sounded like, maybe the SEC coaches weren't too into that idea when it was discussed, at their meetings this summer. But I think that certainly that was a message that was a unified message across the conference here today, was the Big Ten wants those 4 automatic berths. And, Ryan Day said it basically that, we're all excited. Ohio State's excited for that first game against Texas this year. But if the Big Ten doesn't get those automatic berths, if it's a at-large bid type deal and you've got the SEC playing fewer conference games in the Big Ten, that the Big Ten might not play those kind of games anymore. Ohio State might not schedule those kind of games anymore because they're going to look at it and say, you know what, why should we risk taking another loss that could potentially keep us out of a college football playoff when we could play 3 games against teams we should beat easily? So I hope it doesn't come to that. I think we would all agree for the future of college football, it would be better if there are more marquee matchups. I mean, how much more exciting is it getting ready for this season, knowing that Ohio State's going to open the season against Texas rather than against Akron? It just makes it so much more exciting getting ready for week 1. So I really hope that, whenever these sides are able to come together and figure out a format, that it is a format that encourages teams to play more of those big non-conference games rather than discouraging them.
Yeah, and as you have these, it's weird to just see this national impasse play out between the Big Ten and the SEC on the format, on now, again, this call. You want more marquee matchups, but I think a lot of this conversation is correct, that if you're not going to have a playoff format that incentivizes you to schedule those tough non-conference games, why would you do that? I think that has to be baked into whatever the future structure is. And I liked what Curt Cignetti said about how it should be standardized across the board, whether that's 9 conference games, whether that's 8 conference games, whatever it is. If you want to eliminate all the controversy that surrounded the committee in the college football playoff era and the uncertainty about it, you standardize the thing and you have well-defined criteria to where it's very easy to compare teams one-to-one based on their accolades when you're playing, the same number of conference games, when you're playing similar schedules. This is, I think, just a good way to move forward here and determining and trying to better the college football playoff structure. But again, balancing that with how do you still incentivize those tough marquee non-conference games? And if it's a standardized schedule, then in some way, and I don't know how we'd get to that point, but it's just an idea that I like that Curt Cignetti had brought up of if you get to that point, now everyone's required to have that marquee non-conference game. So a lot of interesting discussion. Again, don't want to talk about Curt Cignetti too much because we're an Ohio State website, but it all pertains back to the Buckeyes and what the future of the college football playoff, what the future of the sport looks like. Back on Ohio State, though, I know I was at the Jeremiah Smith press conference breakout table a lot. I was there filming and interviewing Jeremiah, but you got a chance to speak with Sonny Styles a little more, and I know you said that there were some things about Sonny that stood out to you, Dan. What were your takeaways speaking with Sonny today?
Well, I think one of the things that's always interesting to me at these events is not so much hearing the guys talk about themselves, but hearing them talk about their teammates. Because we know these 3 guys are really good, right? Like we know, Jeremiah Smith, just looking at him, like he looks bigger. And like I did ask him about that. Like, have you gotten bigger of his offseason? And he said, he's been as big as 228. And Coach Mick was kind of like, hey, you got to lose a few pounds there. We want to get you down to around that 223 mark. But you can see, like, he's gotten bigger. He's gotten stronger. He says he doesn't think that will affect his speed at all. And so, Jeremiah looking to level up from where he was a year ago. But we already know that the level he was already at a year ago was an elite level. We heard Ryan Day today say he could be a number 1 receiver in the NFL right now. Also said the rule is there for a reason. There was a couple reporters, I think, kind of trying to push the storyline today of Jeremiah Smith shouldn't have to wait 2 more years to go to the NFL. And I don't know that any Ohio State fan would agree with that. I think I have no doubt that Jeremiah Smith could play in the NFL right now, but I think Ohio State is happy it gets to have him for 2 more years. But, you hear Curt Cignetti call him a freak and talk about him in the same breath as Julio Jones. You hear Ryan Day talk the way he talks about Jeremiah Smith. The guy is special. We already knew that coming into today, and I think he did a great job. I'm pretty sure the first ever sophomore that Ohio State has had here at Big Ten Media Days. I thought he did a very good job handling the spotlight, handling the attention. He had by far the largest crowd, especially initially, of the 3 Ohio State players. And one of those other players is Caleb Downs, who's the best safety in the country, in my opinion, the best defensive player in the country. That's how big a star Jeremiah has become, that he had the biggest crowd. But Caleb Downs certainly had plenty of attention as well. And I thought Sonny Styles had a lot of good things to say. He was talking a lot about how, the team is still hungry to want to go win another national championship, certainly hungry to go beat Michigan. And a big reason for that is the fact that, guys like Sonny and Caleb and Jeremiah played big roles in last year's national championship run. Most of the other players on this year's team didn't. So there's a lot of players who are hungry to step up for this team this year. The guy who really got, I think, the most praise of anybody I heard today was Kenyatta Jackson. Sonny really made a point of talking up Kenyatta Jackson when I asked him about who some of the other emerging leaders are on the team. He said that he thinks Kenyatta Jackson could be a first-round pick. He thinks Kenyatta is that good. Jeremiah echoed those sentiments. We heard Ryan Day mention Kenyatta Jackson as well in tandem with Austin Sierreveld, Carson Hinsman, Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, as some of the other guys who have stepped up as leaders alongside Sonny, Caleb, and Jeremiah. for this year's team. But the way everybody was talking about Kenyatta today, that was one of my biggest takeaways of the day for sure. That they really think Kenyatta Jackson's a guy who can be a breakout star on that defensive line this year.
Right, and it's good to hear because I think defensive line in general for this team is kind of the position group that people have the most questions about. You're replacing all 4 starters from last year. Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Caden Curry, have both had their moments, had rotational duty, but they haven't been the guy yet. So you have them. You have Bo Atkinson coming in from North Carolina, obviously, who is probably going to, you would imagine, start or at least compete to start at one of those defensive end spots. But the defensive tackles, too, I think today one of the more telling things, we were talking about it earlier, was hearing Ryan Day talk up Will Smith Jr. And I think we've talked at length about the concerns in terms of defensive tackle depth for this team. Maybe that's a name we're forgetting about, and I think it was very intentional on Day's part to bring it up. People, you brought it up to me earlier, Dan. People forget Will Smith didn't get to play in the spring game, and some of the concerns that happened, how the offensive line was sort of just running over the defensive line in those moments. That was a body they didn't have out on the field maybe to be, could that be your backup nose guard behind Caden McDonald, and where is he at in his progression? I thought it was very interesting that when Day was asked specifically about the defensive tackles, that was the first name out of his mouth. And I think that question also pertains to, well, why didn't Ohio State go get another body in the transfer portal? And Day gave the answer that you kind of expect there, that they did take a look at their options in the portal, but after the evaluations, they just felt, and maybe swinging and missing on some guys, they just felt that, you're not going to take a guy just to take a guy, and stick with the guys in your room, maximize what you have there, try and find that option behind Caden McDonald, and obviously Edric Houston taking that next jump is going to be big. But I think that was, out of all the names I heard today from Ryan Day, from other people, of players that are important, players who are stepping up for this team, none of them really surprised me except for Will Smith Jr., or at least caught me like, that's interesting. Because you expect it from Kenyatta. Caleb Downs was talking up Jermaine Matthews Jr. I think we were expecting a big year from him. There's a lot of guys that we've talked up all offseason, but in that defensive tackle room specifically, I wonder just how real that praise will be, how prophetic it'll prove to be about Will Smith Jr., and maybe he can help with some of the depth concerns in that defensive tackle room.
Certainly a position that's going to be in the spotlight when Ohio State opens up preseason camp next week. I mean, I do think it is the biggest question mark in my mind on the team, that defensive tackle depth. Do they have the bodies they need behind Caden McDonald and Edric Houston to keep them fresh, to be able to rotate, to be able to have a strong interior run defense? I think that remains to be seen, but certainly Will Smith Jr., a player I'm going to have my eye on behind Caden McDonald and Edric Houston. Of course, the other big position that's going to be in focus in preseason camp is that quarterback battle. Really nothing new on that front today. Ryan Day saying that he still views it as a very close battle and that they're going to put those guys in as many competitive situations as possible when preseason camp starts. And we'll see how it plays out. I know there's a lot of people out there who really don't believe what Ryan Day is saying right now, that they think Julian Sayin is going to be the guy, and this is just, it's, Justin Fields or CJ Stroud, Will Howard, you name it, over again, that, he just doesn't want to name a starter before preseason camp. That might be true. I know that that's going to be the reaction from a lot of people if Julian Sayin ultimately wins this job, and we've both said it all along. We do think Julian Sayin is going to win this job, but I do believe that there is some real uncertainty here. I really do believe this is different than, Justin Fields, CJ Stroud, Will Howard in the sense. But I do think that there is still more that Ryan Day wants to see from Julian Sayin, and I also think he likes what he's seen from Lincoln Keenholz this offseason. So I do think it's still a real competition. I think that, if Julian can build off of what we saw from him in the spring game, I do think that he will likely win the job at the end of the day, but I still think he's got to go do it. And I think, one of the big things that Ryan Day talked about today was, the importance of experience, and particularly at that quarterback position, how valuable experience can be. We saw that with Will Howard last year. The reality is these guys don't have that experience, and so they're going to do whatever they can over the course of a month of August to put those guys in competitive situations to try to evaluate just how game ready they are. The reality is, though, we're just not going to know until that first game against Texas how ready either one of those guys are. But we're going to find out really quickly because you can't get a much tougher opponent to start the season than Texas.
Yeah, and again, that urgency of playing Texas in week one has been pervasive in Day's comments throughout this offseason. It was there again today, talking about the challenge and just how quickly you have to get the team acclimated, get them ready, and get all these new pieces into place. And speaking of new pieces, another topic of conversation today with Ohio State, was 2 new coordinators, right? Matt Patricia, Brian Hartline. Got a little more expanded thoughts on Day's hiring of Patricia, what he likes about that hire today. And had a lot of stories around that, obviously, when Patricia was hired. But again, it was reiterated today, and I think it's worth repeating that Patricia has had an ability throughout his career when he was the defensive coordinator with the Patriots, at the very least, to sculpt his defense around the talent at his disposal and not try to fit square pegs and round holes in a designated structure and say, this is the defense that we're going to run, and it's that way or the highway, and the players are going to fit into it. He's always been versatile. He's always been malleable. And that was brought up again today, and I think it's interesting because one of the other storylines I'm going to be watching early here as Ohio State opens preseason camp is, what does some of that creative structure look like? How can you deploy? We saw Caleb Downs be used in so many different scenarios, so many different spots, so many different positions throughout Ohio State's playoff run last year. How do you use Malik Hartford's versatility, Jalen McClain's versatility to do different things in the secondary? Can you get C.J. Hicks involved in some specialty pass rush packages if he's ready for that? How do you you have 3 really talented linebackers who have been talked up all offseason by James Laurinaitis, and we've seen Ohio State run 4-3 in the past, but we see some more creative looks, maybe with some odd fronts where Arvell Reese is down on the line of scrimmage? These types of things, to me, if not in preseason camp, because who's to say how much of that we'll be able to get exposed to early in the season for Ohio State, what do they do with those different packages? But it all comes back to the structure of the 4-2-5 base they've been running. And Ryan Day said when he brought in Matt Patricia, they didn't want to change that structure inherently. They didn't want to move away from what had been working. I mean, you talk about having one of, if not the best defense in college football, certainly last year and maybe even the year before that. They didn't want to get away from what they were doing, what was working, but Matt's going to have his own imprints, his own tweaks, and on top of that, you're going to build the defense around the talent that you have, which is how the best coordinators do it. And so to hear that reiterated today, I think there's reason to be confident in the pieces of this Ohio State defense if the defensive line takes that step that it needs to, the new bodies that are starting up there.
Well, we've got to get going here for today, but we're going to have a lot more coverage to come on 11warriors.com from Big Ten Media Days, both from Ohio State. Lots more to cover from today's interview sessions with Ryan Day, Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles. You can watch those interviews on our YouTube page. We'll have a lot more coverage coming up on 11warriors.com as well, both from them and from the rest of the conference, as there are still 2 more days of Big Ten Media Days to go. Penn State and Oregon going to be the headliners on Wednesday, day 2. So we will be back with more coverage from Big Ten Media Days tomorrow as we talk to some of the favorites in the conference. Penn State. Can Penn State finally get that monkey off its back and beat Ohio State, having not done so since 2016? I'm sure that will be a topic of conversation with the Nittany Lions tomorrow. Oregon, of course, I'm sure they're going to get asked some questions. Whether we ask them or somebody else asks them, I think there's certainly going to be some questions asked about what happened in that Rose Bowl, the dominant win that the Buckeyes had over the Ducks in the CFP quarterfinal. And so we're going to have a lot more coverage to come from here in Las Vegas. For now, he's Andy Anders. I'm Dan Hope. This has been Press Coverage. Thanks for joining us.